This training will orient you to the newly developed benchmark scoring system used during the MEEC accreditation process. You may be fairly familiar with the accreditation process, but the concept of benchmark scoring may be new. In the past, the ARC determined whether each demonstration was adequate and then determined whether the benchmark, as a product of the multiple demonstrations, was met or not met. There was no way to communicate the quality of a benchmark or to communicate how a school might improve its materials or processes if the benchmark was technically met. Simply describing weaknesses in the final report meant that MEEC had no way to track improvement we were hoping to see before the next accreditation review. The shortcomings of the old system inspired the MEEC Executive Committee in the spring of 2013 to develop a scoring system with a few goals in mind. They hoped to standardize the language MEEC uses in its accreditation process and to view each benchmark on a quality improvement continuum. Now that the MEEC board has adopted the language and process, I'd like to provide a bit of orientation. All parts of the MEEC accreditation process are now located in new Section D of the MEEC Handbook. For this training, we are particularly interested in Part 2 of the process, which deals with the self-evaluation report. This is where the ARC gets its first chance to consider how the school has addressed the benchmark requirements. Part 2 begins by coordinating the review by assigning and approving ARC members, penciling in site visit dates, obtaining the SER from the school, and posting public notices. When the SER arrives to MEEC, staff does some homework before turning the large document over to the ARC volunteers. First, staff ensures that all the materials that the school intended to include with the SER are, in fact, included. If not, then staff collects the missing materials, packages them along with the SER, and turns it over to the ARC for an in-depth review. During this careful review of the SER, the ARC will have its first chance to assess the quality of the school's submission. There will be a few pieces of the review that do not require a verification audit during the site visit and are also so complete in the SER that the ARC can assign a score. For these items, the ARC debates how well the benchmark is met or whether it is not met. Of course, there will be many parts of the materials that need additional explanation or a verification audit before this is possible. Benchmarks that are extremely well met can receive a MET 3. This means that the school exceeds the expectation for the benchmark. Giving the 3 to a school is a way to commend the school for its efforts, the way that a strengths section of the final accreditation report used to do. Knowing that a 3 is attainable hopefully inspires schools to go above and beyond the requirements in other areas of their management or instruction. A school that receives a 3 on a benchmark may be asked by MEEC to provide guidance or mentoring on the topic during a member school meeting. When a school completely satisfies the requirements of a benchmark but does not go above and beyond, it will achieve a MET 2. This is the default score for a benchmark that is met. Without a compelling argument from an ARC member that the school has performed much better or much worse on the benchmark, it will be scored with a 2. When a school technically complies with the requirements, but it does so in a hasty, unprofessional, or minimal way, the ARC may assign a 1 to the benchmark. A list of the MET 1 benchmarks are maintained by staff in the review template and, after the review is completed, in a document stored in the Future Accreditation Cycle folder, so that when the school applies for reaccreditation in the future, MEEC staff and ARC are able to quickly identify which benchmarks would show improvement. This is how weaknesses in benchmarks scored with a MET 1 might be captured in a final report. Note that the school meets the minimum requirements for the benchmarks, but the ARC finds weaknesses in the way that it is doing it. For example, the school provides to its students a handbook published 5 years earlier, with 4 or 5 separate papers tucked inside announcing updated academic progress policies and other requirements. Technically, the school is satisfying the requirement that they provide a description to students of how they progress through the curriculum, but the method is unreliable, and the chance of the addenda being separated from the handbook is great. The ARC wanted to see the school improve its method for meeting benchmark 2B, but it did not feel that the benchmark was not met. The not met score is unchanged from prior years. If the ARC reviews all the submitted information and conducts a site visit, but it is not satisfied that the school is meeting the requirements, then it will call the benchmark not met. If a benchmark is not met, it must be addressed immediately and must be fully resolved within 2 years. This will trigger an interim report or series of reports due at a time that is reasonable to the issue. Because information comes to the ARC in a series of submissions, the ARC has the flexibility to revise the score as needed during the process, or even leave an area blank if the ARC wishes to consider more information. The ARC may withhold a score until all the information is gathered. For example, this school did not submit compelling answers for benchmark 1A in their SER, so the ARC considered scoring the benchmark with a MET 1. But you can see the progression of the ARC's understanding how the school meets the benchmark as they dig deeper into the review. After the ARC gathered more information during the site visit interview, they scored the benchmark with a MET 2. For benchmark 1B, the ARC tried to gather information during the SER and in the additional information request without success. Finally, at the site visit, the ARC had enough information to determine that the school had weaknesses that should be improved, so the ARC scored 1B with a MET 1. Part 2 goes on to provide an outline of the steps after the SER review in which the ARC may evaluate more information from the school. First, MEEC simply asks the school to provide a list of additional information. The school responds to the request, and the ARC reviews that response in much the same way that it reviewed the original SER's submission. Here, they have another chance to score the benchmark for which the additional information was submitted. If the whole SER and additional information package contains enough evidence that the school is in good enough shape to become accredited or reaccredited, then MEEC, the ARC, and the school will move forward with a site visit. During the site visit, which is described in Part 3 of Section D and again in detail in Section F of the handbook, the ARC will conduct tours, interviews, and audits to gather any information that will help them score the benchmarks that were blank before the site visit. After the site visit, the ARC and staff prepare a final report. The school gets one last chance to fill in any areas where it believes that the ARC may need more information. If the supplied information changes the opinions of the ARC, benchmark scores may be changed. Then the report goes to the MEEC board for a decision. Ultimately, the board makes all accreditation decisions. Therefore, upon review of the accreditation materials, the board may choose to modify a score, but there is not an opportunity for the school to supply clarification at this point. In summary, benchmark scoring is an actionable and measurable way to communicate and track a school's continued improvement.